Well, welcome everyone today to another episode of the Practical Broker Podcast. Myself is Chad Robinson. I'm a mortgage broker and the host of the Practical Broker Podcast. And I'm really excited to have one of my long-term friends, Rich Danby, on the show with us today. Rich is a real estate investor. He's a speaker. He's an investor extraordinaire. And his journey of how he became a real estate investor and how he became a construction expert and a coach and a trainer and a mentor is amazing to hear. Lots of inspirational stories and lots of things that I really want to get into today with Rich about, some of the mistakes he's made, and hopefully that we can learn through each other to help our customers and our clients and our friends and all of our listeners avoid some of those pitfalls. So welcome, Rich, and thank you for agreeing to be on the show.
Thanks, Chad. It's great to be here, and I'm really excited to be able to contribute to your listeners here today.
That's great. So I remember you and I meeting a little bit too many moons ago now. We were on an executive committee together, and we got together and realized that, hey, we have the same kind of ethics. We really believe in helping people. And I think that's what was the foundation of our relationship, is we both love to help people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell our listeners, how did you get into investing in real estate? Because before you were you were working in film, right? TV.
Yeah, I was in television broadcasting for 15 years. So I think it was 10 years ago approximately, Chad, that you and I met. And as you said, we became fast friends and have been great friends ever since. How I got started essentially was the same way that most people get started, which is I needed a place to live. And so I was fortunate enough that my girlfriend at the time, her mom had some money that she wanted to gift to her daughter. And we ended up getting our first property as a result of that gift. And a year later, we found out that there were people who wanted to buy properties in our neighborhood specifically because they wanted to live in that area. So long story short, we did a quick reno, we sold the property, and we ended up making $66,000 in our very first deal. And I was just in my mid-20s at the time. So it was the most money, needless to say, that I had ever made up to that point in my life.
Wow. So you made $66,000 on your first flip, basically.
Exactly. And here's the crazy part is I didn't really even know what a flip was. And I also didn't know what a joint venture partner was. But my girlfriend's mom ended up being the money partner. And, we said, sure, we will pay you back at some point. But we didn't really know what that looked like. And we didn't have a strategy. We didn't have a plan. We just needed a place to live. So After that happened, it was years later when I realized, what a joint venture partner is and how I could use the exact same thing that I did, but this time in a strategy.
Right. Well, that's great. And then your second property, I believe you had a couple of rentals after that, right? While you were still in the TV producer, you just bought some regular rentals. And
yeah, that's right. So we took that $66,000, we bought a triplex that needed a lot of work. We renovated it, and then we refinanced and bought another rental property, a duplex with that. And so, I was 4 properties in before I realized that, this is a pretty easy way to make money. And now I'm going to take this from being a hobby to being something that I'm going to put some intention behind. And from that point, that's kind of where things started to take off.
That's amazing. So I remember at one point, the decision you face, and a lot of investors face this, I get customers all the time that call me and say, I want to buy real estate because I want to quit my job.
Yeah.
And as you were growing and scaling up, I remember you struggling with that. Like, at what point do you take that leap? And that was, talk to me about how you felt and what kind of let you switch from working the 9 to 5 for the man and becoming a full-time entrepreneur.
Yeah, this is the truth, Chad. The reality is when you go and get introduced to the concept of specifically even joint ventures where you can raise capital from other people and buy properties and flip properties, all these things are so exciting when you first hear about them as a strategy that your first thought is, how can I quit my job and do this full time? But I'll tell you one thing, Chad, hindsight is always 20/20. And the risks that come with taking that leap are severe. A lot of people talk about, I'm going to buy a bunch of properties and I'm going to retire and I'm going to quit my job. But, realistically, Chad, if you're really buying a great property, chances are it's not cash flowing that much. Like if you're buying a property that cash flows, $600,000 a month, the question is, where is that property? Is it rural? Is it in the core of the city? Because as you know, the closer you get to the core, which is where the majority of the appreciation happens, typically in those scenarios, they obviously cash flow less. So the question then becomes, what type of portfolio do you want to have? So from my experience, you can't just quit your job after you buy 5, 6, 7 properties, because that's not even going to be enough to cover your current income from your job. So I would say, like, for me, I quit my job based on the strategy of flipping properties. I was flipping properties. I made enough on one of my flips about, I guess it was 6 years ago, that my wife turned to me and she said, you know what, Rich, it's time for you to spread your wings and fly. And so kind of for me, it was like, it was that moment where she gave me permission to let go of my broadcasting career of 15 years and to pursue it full time. But what that did was it opened up a whole new can of worms that I was not psychologically prepared for, because previous to that, the 40 years of my life, I had been an employee. So I had employee mindset. I had no experience as a business owner. And so, you know, flipping properties and adding legal secondary suites and doing, you know, renovating, buying, renovating, refinancing, that's a business. And, you know, here's the crazy thing. When you have a job, the beautiful thing about the job is at 5 o'clock, switch goes off and your personal life starts. So they don't actually cross paths with each other. And once you become an entrepreneur, as you know, Chad, you've been an entrepreneur since I think you were like 12 when you had your like lawn mowing business or something,
pretty much.
Maybe even younger. But that is you need to be prepared in a whole new way. And unfortunately, I think one of the biggest lessons I learned is if you leap too fast, you're really setting yourself up for failure.
For sure. And obviously when you're financing, you know, these renovations or even long-term holds, if you have a regular job, the banks love you a lot more. Once you're independent and you're self-employed, that you don't get the same interest rates until you've been at it for a few years. So there's always a gap when people make that leap.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you can hang on to your job and just, you know, slowly add to your portfolio. If you like your job, there's really no reason to leave. I think the reason I love my job, by the way, I love the people that I worked with. I mean, I was in TV, so how that was a lot of fun. But I think if even just the strategy of me staying there and taking the knowledge that I gained and just moving at a much slower pace, that would be a very safe way to do it, where you're getting the best of both worlds. You don't have to jump in all the way in, but my personality, I just couldn't help myself. So, you know, I said, I'm going to burn the boats and I'm just going to figure it out. And so, you know, with that comes a lot of excitement, but again, it's a lot of highs and lows, and you really have to put a lot of attention on your personal development along the way. Otherwise, it is a suicide mission.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned something at the beginning, which I think is really paramount. And a lot of people don't really realize the impact that owning multiple real estate properties, and especially flips, which is a business. It's not just like buying, you know, a rental and thinking about it once a month. Is your spouse really gave you permission, and she was all in this ride along with you.
Yeah,
you know, I think
absolutely.
you're coaching a lot of people, right? That their spouses aren't as in line with them.
Yeah, I've had a lot of friends come to me and they say, I love what you're doing. I really wish I could do it, but my wife, she's just not on board. She just has no interest in it at all. And if that's your scenario where you have a spouse who's not engaged with you, the advice I've always given is to try to include them on the journey. And, you know, for Chad, you know, one of the things that people have to do is they have to get a kind of a clear vision as to why they're doing it. And, you know, a lot of people say, oh, I want to own 100 properties, or I want to have 1,000 doors. But, you know, like if you lift the hood up and figure out why, is it just a random number that you threw out? Or is there a specific thing that owning 100 properties is going to do for you? So when you get through that initial conversation, it is like, okay, well, what is owning 100 doors going to do for your spouse? And a lot of times when I'm talking to coaching clients, they're like, I don't know. I never really thought about that. I just wanted to own 100 properties. And I've always encouraged people, if you try to include your spouse in the journey, and for me, my goals are very minimal. Chad, you know my background and where I came from. I mean, just to have a car that has air conditioning, I mean, to me, that, you know, I'm happy with that. So I had to really dig into, what are my wife's wants? What does she want? What would a future of us investing time and energy into real estate provide for her that would inspire me to keep pushing forward? Because just a specific number, you're going to run out of steam really quickly if that's the way that you're strategizing your goals.
Absolutely. I get that all the time in the regular mortgage business where people come to me and I've had that exact thing. I want to buy 100 doors. And like you, my question is why? Like, well, I want to quit my job. Okay. Well, you make 80 grand a year. If the average property is cash flowing $300 a month, you don't need 100 properties, but, or maybe you do, depending on if you have other goals. And going through that, now realistically, most people don't own 100 doors. That's the exception to the rule. And it's a lofty goal and some people achieve it, which is fantastic. But you're right about connecting with your spouse, and we're both lucky to have spouses that love real estate and are definitely in it in multiple ways.
And they're very supportive of us. They give us a lot of space.
Yeah, I believe you can't do any business as an entrepreneur without your spouse supporting you, no matter what business you're in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you really started making your money in flips, right? You had some great long-term rentals that were chugging along, making good money and getting some appreciation, and then you dove head first into flipping.
Yeah.
So tell me about how that started outside of your first four.
Sure. Well, we all run out of money at some point, right, Chad? So my first scenario where I ran out of money, I actually wasn't out of money, but Christina was on maternity leave at the time. And so what happened was we went and bought a property in Hamilton, Ontario. It was like $169,000 for a triplex. That same triplex today would be somewhere around $700,000. So I thought, great, everything's going to be fine. And we went ahead and bought the property. We put in a conditional offer. And the day before we were supposed to waive conditions, we got a call from the mortgage broker that we were working with at the time. And he said, unfortunately, they're not going to approve the mortgage because your wife is on maternity leave and there's no guarantee she's going to go back to her job. So I said, well, what's the alternative? And he said, well, we could probably get you with a B lender, but because you have to waive your conditions by tomorrow, you're going to have to make a decision. I can't make any guarantees. We still have to jump through the hoops. And so at that time, I thought, that is not a risk that I was willing to take. So I bailed. And, I look back in hindsight and go, I probably should have said yes anyway and figured it out later. But at the time, I didn't have the mindset or the courage to do that. But what really came from that, Chad, was I realized in that moment that I was never going to give total control over my ability to buy properties to the banks ever again. And that was the moment that I decided that I needed to learn how to raise capital. So that is actually what led to the flipping, was knowing that I had unlimited funds as long as I found a deal, had a great strategy, and I could show whoever the potential investor was, what is the property worth? What is my game plan? What exactly am I going to be doing? And what is the after repair value? So by providing all of that information, which was stuff that I already had been doing, just not strategically, I was able to take my existing portfolio and use that kind of as, here's the history of what I've done. And then from that point forward, I had no problems. I started just raising capital very easily. And I just started flipping properties one after the other, just getting going that way.
So it sounds like really that fundamental shift was just purely a mindset shift, because you already had all the training, you had the expertise, you're analyzing these properties anyway, but you just flipped the switch in your mind and realized, man, I can actually just do this and raise other people's money and help them get a good return too.
Yeah, and the lesson in that, Chad, really is about the failure, because had I not failed, I may have never made that shift. We may not even be having this conversation today. And so, when you have failures happen to you, a lot of people feel like, yeah, it happened to me. But in reality, those failures are happening for you. And you just have to figure out what is the lesson that I'm supposed to be learning. And if you focus on that and figure out the lesson, then ultimately that failure will have served a great purpose that will propel you to where you want to go.
100%. Well, you mentioned something. I like to always keep podcasts and our shows very positive, but you mentioned something that I just wanted to bring up. Today, I had a phone call with an investor. He had invested in a flip with a person that wasn't as sophisticated as you are.
Right.
And, he didn't have the track record that went through, and he ended up losing a substantial amount of money on this. Now, I think at the end of the day, he's going to come out okay, but there's still a decent loss. So what's your recommendation or your advice to the investors that are out there? Because there's a lot of people out there saying, invest with me, I'm really experienced. And what are some things that you think the investors should look for?
Well, investors, So you're saying what they should look for before they start getting into investing in properties, is that right?
Yeah. And how to choose their partner right, because there's a lot of people with money. There's more
Oh,
money
right. Sure,
available
sure,
than skill. So
sure.
believe it or not, people think it's the other way around, but there's more money available than there is people that can distribute it and do
Right.
these deals the right way.
Right, right. Okay, so if I'm a person who has those funds and I'm looking to place my funds, I really want to make sure that the person that I'm placing the funds with is the real deal. And here's what happens. A lot of these events that you go to, they teach people how to invest, but these people don't have a track record. They're maybe just getting started. Maybe they're really good at selling. So I
Mhm.
would really just want to know everything about their background and their track record. And it's a tough position to be in because it's kind of like being a student and you want to get your first job, but you don't have any job experience. So how do you
Right.
get your first job without actually, how do you have a resume with no job?
Mhm.
So if I'm lending money, I really just want to know, there is a lot of, as you said, a lot of great opportunities out there. So it's really just knowing who you're putting your funds with and then just figuring out what that risk is. And
Right.
like, if the projections are really high of what they're anticipating it will be worth, then you may want to go do your own research, get your
Mhm.
own comparables to see is this likely? And then if the worst case scenario is the person fails, then what does that look like for you? Can you
Right.
recoup your funds? Are you going to lose money? And if you are you okay with that?
Absolutely. I had a meeting yesterday where, as you know, I'm launching into some commercial funds
Right.
and doing some large commercial syndications. And I was meeting with a very, very experienced investor that, controls a significant amount of money. And he said, Chad, what I want you to do is I want you to tell me, where is this going to go wrong? Where's the worst case scenario? Where's the potential failure points, and how are you going to mitigate that? And I'm like, all right, great. I know how to present to you as the worst. What's your plan A, your plan B, your plan C? The roses and sunshine are always great, but what's your strategy to protect me if things don't go so great?
Yeah, I like that question because it tells me that the person who you're dealing with is sophisticated. And
Exactly.
for me, I get scared when people don't ask questions. I'd rather them drill me,
Yeah.
and this way it gives me an opportunity to make sure that they've received all the information possible. And if you are getting started out, that's a really good thing because you can learn from your mistakes, you can learn from what you said wrong or what you did wrong, or maybe there was a part of your plan that you just weren't considering that you needed to add to really make sure that you're considering all of those things as well that your investors are asking about.
100%. So you started doing this flips. Your background wasn't construction, right? Your background was in broadcasting.
That's right. Yeah. I had to
So
learn I had to learn the hard way.
yeah, yeah. Because at first, I mean, you were doing tile work. I remember, and you're in there painting and drywalling. And tell me about how
Yeah.
you kind of grew on that, and where you had some of the pitfalls where you people can hopefully avoid.
Sure, sure. So those were the early days, and that was before I became a sophisticated real estate investor. Yes, I was doing my own tiling. I still own actually one of those properties where I was doing my own work, and I go into one of the apartments and I just have a good laugh now because it was terrible. It was absolutely
Crooked
terrible.
tiles.
Oh, crooked tiles. It was just brutal. But yeah, I think the big thing is to try to get away from that as quickly as you can. It doesn't
Mhm.
save you money. This is a big mistake that a lot of people think in their head is that if they put more of their time into it, that they're actually going to save money. But in reality, that's not always the case. In fact, most of the times it's not the case because your time is worth money. And so if
Mhm.
you're in there trying to contribute and save yourself time, but you actually are not a pro, like who's going to be faster at painting a house? Maybe you'll save yourself $1,000, but you can get it painted in 1/5 the time if you hire professionals. So I would say get to that as quickly as you can and put the tools down.
I agree, 100%. And the job will usually look better, and it's a write-off, right? You can't write off your own time.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's one of the big things that people make as a mistake. And I did the same thing too. It's like, well, what really is the value of your time?
Mhm.
And as I started to really grow my portfolio and started to get involved in more and more projects, I eventually ran out of time. And then only at that point did I say, okay, what do I eliminate? How do I eliminate it? But prior to that, I was always trying to save a buck and just try to be as efficient as I could with the finances side. But in the end, I realized that was a foolish way of approaching things, and I had to make those adjustments pretty quickly.
For sure. I have a conversation a lot with my clients on the mortgage side that we're, especially doing renovation projects and construction projects, time is the killer. When you have construction financing, which is always more expensive, or joint venture financing or some private financing, or you're paying higher interest rates for these things, getting things done quickly is more important than saving $50 or $100. Um, I suggest that all the time. And sometimes people listen and sometimes they don't.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, typically, even if you're just doing a residential flip in Ottawa, your carrying costs are probably going to be like, anywhere between 3,500 to 5,500 bucks a month.
Yeah.
So, if you're delaying your project even by a week,
Yes.
you're not really saving any money.
No, absolutely. The other thing that I see quite often, and I recommend to everybody, is plan, get the right permits. Talk to the right architects. Don't skimp out in the planning phase, because it's going to cost you, sometimes double, triple, or quadruple later on when you're not getting those right engineering drawings. Or can you tell me about some of your stories and experiences you've had, especially when it comes to surprises that you've gotten?
Sure. Well, I think one of the biggest temptations is to not get drawings. It's to just get in there and do it, because people, when they don't have the experience, they're afraid. They're afraid of the city. They're afraid they're going to get shut down. They're afraid that their budget's going to get completely blown out the window. And therefore, they choose not to go the route of going through the city, and they try to do it themselves, and they just try to get in and get out. And I can tell you, as a person who did that early on, I got caught. You'll get caught too, right? You'll eventually, there's going to be a bin in your driveway, and somebody from the city is going to walk by. They're going to be looking for those permits in the window, and they're not going to be there. And that is going to be way more time consuming, because you're essentially going to have to freeze everything you're doing, start all over, get the drawings, and go through the process of waiting for approvals. And that is a very, very expensive mistake to make. So, if you haven't, I know that you know this, Chad, but I don't want to say we've all done it, but I certainly have, and I know many people have too. And it really just doesn't pay to try to cut corners in any way.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of people are surprised that, well, in the city of Ottawa, so each municipality has some differences, but in the city of Ottawa, if you're even just taking down an interior partition wall, technically you're supposed to get a building permit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and as far as like the renovations and going through all that stuff with the drawings, you look at Ottawa, and legal secondary suites is probably the most popular strategy right now, because cash flow is an issue. You can't buy cash flowing duplexes and triplexes. Certainly can't buy cash flowing single family homes. You might be able to make them work if they're Airbnbs, but as a typical buy and hold strategy where you're just renting to regular tenants, you're going to have to come up with a strategic way to do that. And so a lot of people go the legal secondary suite route. And that is in Ottawa, I would think that about 90% of legal suites are not legal. They're illegal suites. And it comes down to exactly that, is that, it's one thing to go into a regular property and just do a reno as a flip. But when you're doing a legal secondary suite, the complexity of that between the two units with fire separation, egress windows, it's just, it's a whole new can of worms. And the cost of that can ridiculously add up. And that's why so many people do them illegally. But now, as the city starts to crack down on that, and as, property values go up and there's less and less inventory available, the city is now taking a harder look at that. And it's, they're getting harder to insure and harder to finance. And it's definitely something that you want to avoid.
Absolutely. I had a conversation today. I had clients in the office, and we were talking about exactly that. He wanted to suite a building that's almost 100 years old. It was actually a townhouse downtown. And so one of these older red brick kind of, multi-unit rows. And I was talking about, okay, well, in your fire coating, your fire separating that, if you touch that old plaster and plath, you're ending up ripping apart all the walls, and there's, you got the fire coating between units, especially if it's up and down. You got to be really careful that you do it the right way with the right drywall, and the city is very strict, especially on the fire code.
Yeah, it's a dangerous game for sure. And that's one of the things I say with people. If you have no experience doing this, you definitely should not do it alone. At the very least, go hire somebody to mentor you, to coach you, take some courses, do something, but you can't just go in there blindly and say, you know what, I want to go add a legal secondary suite, because you will lose your shirt. Yeah, you'll lose your shirt for sure, because, you know, every city inspector has their own perception, their own view, their own interpretation of the building code. The building code changes a little bit every year. And so depending on who you get, that's going to impact your plans. And when you take a building that's been there for, you know, 60 years, and you go in there and try to change its use, every single property is going to present a new set of challenges. And a lot of those challenges don't reveal themselves until after you start tearing things apart.
100%. Well, give us some of those examples, because I know you've had a few doozies that were just completely, even though you budgeted, you know what you were doing, you had the right team, there are a few things where like, whoa, what is that?
Yeah, I think the big one is that when you do bungalows, you get in there and you make your mistakes from the first property, and then you get into the second one thinking that you've learned everything that you need to know. Well, you haven't, because every property is designed differently. So you'll find things like, you know, where the air conditioner is located, where the gas meter is located, where the stairs in the front are located. So when you're thinking about, you know, where do I put the windows? How do I fulfill the egress requirements? It's just so many different things that happen that there isn't really, there is not a program out there that will teach you every single thing you need to know, because you're not building new construction. You're taking old homes and converting them. So really, it's just risk mitigation, and that happens really only from having a solid team around you.
100%. So who are those key team members? Like, who have you built up that you think are indispensable that you have?
I think it's somebody who really, really understands the building code. That's probably the most important part of all of it, because if, you know, let's say ceiling height requirements, that's a pretty common one. If you don't have the right ceiling height requirement, then you're going to have to dig out the entire basement floor, and it's not going to be legal. You also have to have clearances around going down those stairs so that you can get through, and all the stuff I mentioned with windows. And so that's the key one, somebody who understands the building code, and then also somebody who can do proper drawings. One of the mistakes I made early on was I hired somebody to do drawings that was just kind of on the cheap, somebody I knew. I've done drawings before, I can do this for you. Well, there were so many details that were missing. And yes, you can go submit your own drawings to the city. Yes, you do not need somebody who's an expert at doing that. You can go ahead and do it. The city allows you to do it. The problem is if you have a million different things that the city doesn't approve of or wants more information on, all you're really doing is you're delaying the process. And if you delay the process 10 days to save $1,000 on drawings, then again, you didn't save anything. It cost you money. So that would be another key member. And then of course, it's people who understand the construction. And as an investor coming in and buying properties, I'm not a contractor. So I have to rely on their expertise until I, over time, will gain enough experience to understand it better. But ultimately, it's kind of like taking your car to the mechanic. I can go to the mechanic multiple times, but that still doesn't make me a mechanic. So even though I may have a much better understanding as time goes on, I'm still really going to need somebody on my team who understands how to execute whatever strategy it is that I'm applying. And those are really your key members. And then, of course, having a great realtor, somebody who understands, if we're talking about legal secondary suites, understanding what really is the value of that legal secondary suite upon completion. So that's kind of the core group right there.
Absolutely. I recommend to people all the time, and this, we had this advice that I gave to you at the beginning, which is fantastic, and it helped with all the refinancing you did over the years, is when you start the renovation project or putting a suite in, or even just doing a flip, document, right? Take pictures of everything, the before, the after, keep all your receipts. That's the other thing about if you're doing the work yourself, you can't really give a receipt for that. We have some lenders that look and say, okay, well, how much did you actually spend on this renovation? Did you really spend $100,000 to justify this value increase? And making a good package for the appraisers, right? If you're refinancing, having those pre-photos and post-photos, like look at the green ugly carpet and the purple toilet, and look at this beautiful bathroom.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, one thing that we know to be true, Chad, is not all appraisers are created equally. Right? Yeah. There are guys who've been around for years, and some of those guys are just dialing it in. And if you're doing legal secondary suites, they may just be comparing it against bungalows. And that really isn't going to help you at all. So I would say if you're in a situation where you feel like the appraiser doesn't understand, if they're not open to you when they first come to the property, and to your point, Chad, yes, you definitely have to be prepared, and you have to have something that you could show them or share with them. If they reject you from the moment that they walk there, and I wouldn't even let them in, I would send them away. And I've actually had to do that. And I've only had to do that from learning the hard way. But when an appraiser shows up and they're like, no, I know what I'm doing, I don't need any input from you, then that's when I know that that's probably not going to work out so well. And you don't have to pay anything if you send them away instantly. So really just be prepared, have all your documentation, and just walk them through a detailed list and provide them the detailed information. Because realistically, who's ever walked through a property and has been able to pick up on all of the details of what's been done? Like, it's impossible.
Especially the stuff that's behind the scenes, right? An appraiser may not know that you took down the drywall and you re-insulated and you scabbed the walls out from a 4-inch studs to a 6-inch studs, and and brought up the code and did all the proper vapor barrier. It just looks like a sheet of drywall.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that the appraisers really need to know, and like you said, give that details and that really good report. It's kind of an interesting segue. I wasn't planning on talking about this today, but on the mortgage brokerage side, there's a lot of lenders that let us choose the appraisers we use, and there's a lot of lenders that make us order blind. So, if you're walking into a branch, typically they go in and they put an appraisal into a system. It's an automated system, and the cheapest, the lowest cost person picks up the job. And the lowest cost person is typically the most junior person out there. So they may or may not have the experience of basic, secondary, basement suites, or they might have got their license, a year ago. Some of these are called AMS, automated management or appraisal management systems, can be good. Not throwing all appraisers under the bus that use them, but picking a lender that allows you to help choose the appraiser. And it's not to influence the value, saying, give me an incorrect value. It's saying, I just want an experienced appraiser. Makes the world of difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Having an automated person come in, that could work good and bad. Like if they're relatively new, maybe they're open-minded more to kind of look at some of the stuff. And I think you should not put it all into the appraiser's hands. You need to have your own comparables. And as investors, Chad, you and I know a lot of other investors. So, I'm going to ask around and see, hey, who owns a property in this area or that area? And what did it get appraised for? So then this way I can provide that data to the appraiser and just kind of say, hey, here, let me just kind of give this information to you. And it usually will help your cause.
So talk to me about that. What do you actually give your appraisers? Share with our listeners how you prepare for an appraiser on a refinance after you've done the basement suite conversion.
Well, what I'll do is I'll have in hand visuals that I can show them and just see how they respond to it. So it could be just a simple binder with, here are the before and after, and here's a list of all the details. But then after, if they take the binder or they don't take the binder, I'll say, can I have your card? And I'd like to send you some information if that's okay. And just to share kind of what I spent the money on. And I'll literally send them everything. I'll send them the before folder. So on Google Drive, I'll send them a link to a Google Drive. It'll have all the photos in it of the before. It'll have the photos of the during, the stuff of the after. It'll have the budget of everything I spent money on. And then also we'll have comparables of other properties in the area, what they're renting for, and also, what the appraised value is afterwards. So I'm literally trying to give them everything possible with the hopes that they'll look at some of it.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, appraisers are human beings and they're busy. And if you can help make their job easier, they're more likely to, give you a value that's more supportive, assuming that that's the market value, right? At the end of the day, we're not asking them to do anything that's not market value, but you just make that job easier for them.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's amazing. So on the basement suite conversions, you talked a lot about getting plans and getting somebody that understands the building code is key. How does somebody find somebody like that?
I think a lot of it has to just do with asking around. And, if you're part of some really good networking groups about how to learn how to invest in real estate, essentially that's all you do. This, beautiful thing with Google these days is you can see reviews of a company pretty quickly. And, there's a lot of ways. It's really just getting in there and researching, calling, and eliminating through just getting on the phone.
Yeah, perfect. And then on the construction side, getting that team, you know, I know you've had over the years because you've done so many of these projects.
Yeah.
How do you separate the, you know, the wheat from the chaff? The guys that are like, they talk a good game, they're, you know, oh yeah, I've done 50 projects, I can do this, no problem. And really, they're just completely BSing you.
Yeah.
What are some warning signs or some red flags that you've kind of picked up on?
The biggest warning flag is their availability.
Okay.
I know that
That's a good
sounds
one,
crazy.
yeah.
It sounds crazy, but you know, we're in Ottawa right now, and Ottawa is the hottest market in the entire country.
Yeah.
So if you're putting up an ad and you need somebody tomorrow and they answer your ad, there's a 99% chance that that's not going to end well for you. And so,
Right.
you know, I would say it really comes back to relationships and planning in advance. So, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it's like there is unfortunately very few really, really good contracting companies out there. And the ones that are really good are very busy. They don't even need your business. In fact, sometimes they don't even return your calls. Not that that's good business, but you know, it's a supply and demand issue. So
Right.
really it's just figuring out who is the best in this field, who's really good at what they do. And that just comes from asking around, making a lot of phone calls, and then eventually making a decision. You'll want to show up on their job, see what their track record is. But you know, realistically, some people give the advice that you want to see their portfolio and you want to see all the stuff that they did. Really good contractors, they don't have that. They don't need it. They're just
Right.
really good at what they do, and they're constantly working. So
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, there is no substitute for trial and error. And it
Right.
doesn't matter how many projects you've done. Eventually, you're going to have to upgrade some members of your team because, you know, as the more and more that you do with them, the more and more they're going to see the value in which they offer you, and they're going to
Right.
be looking for a raise. So there's
Mm-hmm.
no one size fits all. There's no guaranteed, you know, perfect strategy, but it
Mm-hmm.
really is just about planning in advance, trying to get in touch with people as early as you can, and giving them all the information so that when they come to quote your job, that they're comparing apples to apples. And I think one of the big mistakes that people make in the beginning is they don't detail out enough the things that need to be done. And
Yeah.
so when the second guy comes in, he says, well, what about this? What about that? And then the investor would say, oh yeah, add that. I didn't think of that. And then the third guy will come in, it'll be the same thing. What about
Mm-hmm.
that? What about that? And then now you're no longer comparing apples to apples. So as much detail as you can provide in advance, the better it is and the easier it is to get a quote and to be able to compare against the different people that you have come through.
Absolutely. It's funny you bring that up. I had that exact advice to a client this morning. I said, plan, 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 get the engineering drawings done in big details, get your plumbing spec'd out, get your electrical spec'd out, you know, talk to that HVAC engineer and get a full spec, because then when you're quoting, they're, like you said, they're quoting on actual, you're not going to get a lot of change orders because everything is being, you know, all addressed up front in that quote.
Right.
The other trick I've learned, and I don't know if you've ever used this when talking with contractors, is asking them for their WSIB certificate up front, asking them about their insurance and saying, can you provide it to me? And if they don't give it to you the same day,
Yes.
hmm,
Yeah. It's very easy to get pulled into a story
yeah,
because I mean they're selling. And you know, as each job happens, as you think every contractor, a guy who has absolutely no experience whatsoever,
mm-hmm,
um, they will have experience after they failed on their first job. And
right,
they'll have maybe a little bit of something that they learned that they could use. And then they take that to the next conversation. And then even if they fumbled through 10, 20 jobs, which is still possible because people are still responding to the Kijiji,
yeah,
they're going to be better at selling you on their experience. So that's just a trap. And actually, that is the most common trap that people can find themselves in. So you really just want to do everything you can to avoid dealing with those types of contractors. Stay away from Kijiji. And even the referrals that you get, you know, one of the big questions I ask is like, why are you referring that person? Are you related to them? Like, what's their motivation? And then sometimes it's just innocent, like they did a job for me. Okay, great. Well, what was the job that they did for you? Oh, well,
right,
they tiled a powder room. Well, that's not really the same as renovating an entire house,
right.
right? So it's just, even though people may have good intentions when they're giving you those referrals, you really have to take it upon yourself to ask more questions.
100%. So what I'm hearing basically from what you said was do a lot of planning, ask a lot of questions, and build your team and take it slow at first, slow and steady sort of before you're jumping in and burning the boats, as you said.
Yeah, absolutely. And just know that even if you do everything right, there is still a chance that things will go horribly wrong. It's just
Right.
the reality. So if you're thinking about doing a flip specifically, you really have to make sure you understand what your profit potential is.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to, say, well, what happens if my budget goes 50% over?
Right.
What happens then? So it's really, a lot of people will do flips and they'll like, my best case is I make, 30 grand. My worst case is I make 10 grand. Well, if that's your margin on a flip, then you're really putting yourself, 30 grand could be gone in a flash on a flip. So I would say really give yourself a lot of buffer.
Absolutely. I had a client last year that they did a flip and, typical house in Ottawa, and they opened up the walls and every single air duct was wrapped in asbestos. Every one. And there was no way they would have known until they opened up the walls, took down the drywall.
Yeah. That's the kind of stuff that happens every time.
Yeah. There was no way to know. And I mean, that's a huge abatement cost that nobody was planning for.
Right.
So that's amazing, Rich. I really appreciate all the advice you're giving. I mean, I know we could go in for hours here. So one of the things, you've evolved your coaching career a little bit. Obviously, you're still doing flips. You're still doing some investment properties yourself. But you've excited to start launching something else of your own, your own club in a way. Let's talk about that, about Masters in Real Estate, and what is that?
Sure. Yeah, Masters of Real Estate is for people who want more. That's essentially what it is. And if you look across Canada and even in the US, most people are teaching beginners and they're teaching intermediate. And so if you kind of look at Tony Robbins as the example, he has something called platinum membership, and people pay a significant amount of money to be part of that, but it also puts them around people who are at their level. So what I've noticed to be quite common with some of the clubs that I've been involved with is that really good people, unfortunately, move on. They graduate. Mm-hmm. And it's because these clubs are not serving their needs. And so they'll be, hey, I've learned and now I'm the big fish. And eventually they're like, I'm not really getting a tremendous value out of it. So I just really wanted to be the solution to that, because I recognize that a lot of these clubs, they have great content, but it's just one event. So, you could go to an event, somebody introduces you to a new concept, which happens, of course, with real estate. It's like a 30-lane highway. Yeah. So you go and you learn for an hour about something amazing, but the problem is that there's no follow-up to that. So what I really wanted to do was I wanted to help people move faster on their journey and just identify themselves as, if they want to move slow, they can certainly do that. But if they want to speed things up, I want to give them the opportunity to be able to do that. Because what I've recognized is that, all these clubs, they have the best intentions and they put on great content, but it's not enough information for those investors to put it into action and really create the change. So we see a lot of the same people coming out time and time again, and they're not really making massive progress because they don't know how. And so Masters of Real Estate is designed to help people fast forward their journey, but also to create an environment for people who are more advanced to network and socialize as well as part of their own community.
Absolutely. A little while ago, I joined a CEO group, and it was amazing. That putting me in that stratosphere of other CEOs that are having very different conversations than some of the other business groups that are more introductory, and it helped me leapfrog my business, hundreds of percent, because I'm learning from these people that are just, some of them are on my level and some of them are multiple levels way above me. And it's incredible to be surrounded by like-minded people, but that are at the same stage as you. That's incredible that you're doing that.
Yeah. And I think, the other thing is that you don't know what you don't know. And it's not until you end up in those types of circles. Like I just came back from LA, and I have a group that I'm part of out there. And the stuff that I learned from just being part of that mastermind group was like, these were not even things I was thinking about, but hearing what really successful people are doing, you're like, oh, wow, like I really need to consider that as well. And I feel like that's kind of the advantage to be part of those types of communities, as you mentioned. And that's exactly my intent behind Masters of Real Estate.
That's amazing. So I think you're launching that when, this spring, this summer?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm working on details right now, exactly how to launch and what to launch with, because the first event is obviously pretty important to me.
Yeah,
And yeah, I'm just kind of finalizing the details now, and we'll have more information in the coming weeks.
that's great. So I know at the beginning of the show, just before we started recording, you had mentioned that you have a fact sheet or a tip sheet that you can help people doing basement suites. What
Yeah,
is that, and how can people get that information?
Yeah, sure. So basically, it's 7 tips to avoid disaster. I don't remember exactly what the title of it is, but basically, when adding legal secondary suites, there are so many things that could go wrong.
Yeah,
So this is just my gift to your viewers, your listeners, to
great.
just try to help them with it. So if they want a copy of that, all they have to do is send me an email at rich@mastersofrealestate.com.
Perfect. And I'm seeing mastersrealestate.com is a website they can go to as well. Probably put their email address in for future events, get on the mailing list, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's great. I really appreciate it, Rich. And the one last thing I always like to ask is, in the last 2 or 3 years, we've talked a lot about mindset, both online this call and just in our own conversations. What book or event have you found that's really helped the most you with your growth in the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think it's the 5 a.m. Club by Robin Sharma.
Yeah.
If you own the beginning of your day,
Mhm.
then the rest of your day becomes easy. If you don't own the beginning of your day, then your day owns you. And I
Mhm.
feel like for me, I've been in all sorts of different habits and routines and just different things that I've tried over the years. But I feel like if you can get up at 5 a.m. and just really get going on your day and get all your personal development, all the excuses that you have around why you don't have time to go to the gym, why you don't have time to read, why you don't have time to journal. If you just get up and start doing it, then
Mhm.
you'll get into momentum that is just so exciting that by the time you get home, you're not really going to be interested in watching TV because you're going to be tired. You're going to want to get to bed and you're going to want to get on with it the next day. So I
Yeah.
feel like that structure of, the 5 a.m. club
Mhm.
it's awesome. And the tip on that is, people go, well, wait a second, I don't get up till 7.
Yeah.
So I'm supposed to start the 5 a.m. club tomorrow? No, don't
Mhm.
start tomorrow. My advice on that is to actually start in 15-minute increments,
Right.
week by week. So if you're getting up at 7 a.m. now, then start getting up next week at 6:45. Do that for a week, then go to 6:30, then 6:15 to 6, eventually working your way down to 5 a.m. And this way it won't feel like that drastic of a change. In fact, you won't even notice it if it's only 15 minutes increments. But that would be a great way to kind of create the life that you want and close the gap between where you are and where you want to be.
That's amazing advice, Rich. And I'm working down in the 15 increments now, and about at 6 a.m. most days. So I read that same book, and yeah, it's just incredible. I love it.
Right on. Good job, Chad.
Yeah, we're trying. I'm getting there. Well, thank you very much, Rich, and to all of our listeners, we had Rich Danby on the show today from Masters of Real Estate, and we did a deep dive on some basement suites, the conversions, a little bit of mindset training, and a lot more. So you can find out information about Rich of mastersofrealestate.com. And thank you very much.
Thank you.